So here at OCISO Pressland Nonprofit Housing, there are two solar electricity facilities owned by the Ottawa Renewable Energy Co-op. Both are 10 kilowatts. The interesting thing about these sites from a demonstrative purpose is that one is using string inversion and one is using micro inversion. Also, one has a large overbuild, whereas the other is a standard 20% overbuild. So that's the interesting components that we'll see here on site. Also on site, OCISO has installed solar hot water systems about 2 years ago. So those are used to heat the domestic hot water used on site and save energy for the tenants.
The purpose of OCISO is to provide housing for refugees and immigrants primarily. When we bought these 64 townhouses, 36 of them were abandoned and derelict. So we were able to upgrade them in some very meaningful ways. I'll just mention that the Enviro Center did most of the installation of these buildings. There's a ton of insulation in the roof, in the basement. We also took out the inside exterior walls, furred them out, and insulated them and put new drywall on. And we found that there was a program available to provide hot water, solar hot water heating for these units. So we took advantage of it, and we've been monitoring it ever since. You can see the two panels up there on that end unit. That's what's providing hot water to these units. We have a hot water tank that's designed to accept glycol heat transmission for hot water production. That's in the basement. It costs, for those of you who are thinking of doing this, it costs us $1,800 for that hot water tank, which is about 3 times the average price of a hot water tank, but that's what technology costs. Now, what are the results? The results are very important to the OCISO organization, and we have a number of units that don't face south, that are on Naughton and Lola Street, so we can compare their energy costs to the energy costs of the units with solar panels. We found that the average saving is about $600 a year. So the whole system costs about $11,000 to install per unit, and you can see we've got a rate of return of about 5.5%. And we've got 2 CAs on the board of OCISO Housing, and they are very much results driven, so we've had a good result. Now the last thing I'm going to mention is that all of the benefit goes to the tenants in the solar hot water system. And that's something that a lot of other social housing providers don't think about. They don't think about the energy poverty that some tenants are experiencing. And the board is very proud of the solar hot water system here.
So it's the tenants in this house, and what about the ones that don't have the solar? How do
Yeah,
you deal
well,
with
their
their
units,
energy poverty?
their units face east and west, and we're having discussions at the board level about that. And one idea that's in development right now is to provide gas kitchen stoves to replace the electric stoves, because they're the second largest user of power in the units. And another proposal is to start giving away LED lamps.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah. And so what my job right now is to determine at what point can we implement these plans. Certainly the gas stoves are a more expensive plan. The LED lamps are more incremental. You know, you can start out with giving people 3 lamps in a year, and do that by 64 units here, and then ramp up from there. So the LED lamps are slated for Christmas.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice. So
And-
energy savings, and they last longer.
That's right, that's right. And we've done LED lamps in our other buildings, and we've also observed in the public spaces that the custodian doesn't have to replace lamps anymore.
Yeah.
They last well, supposedly for 20 years, but feels like forever.
In those other units, is it gas, hot water?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. So it's, wow, it's that much savings, eh? Holy smokes.
Now, one practical thing you should know is that there's hardly any energy available in the period December 15th to February 15th. It's really a cold period when you don't benefit from solar panels. But the rest of the year,
In probably 3 years' time, it will make sense. Solar will have come down in price so much, and electricity prices will have gone up enough that we'll be at what's called the net metering break-even point. And it will make sense to install solar on your home just to offset your own electricity bills.
Or if you live off grid.
Or live off grid. It already makes sense because it costs so much to bring power into your home.
Yeah.
But you'd need to have your own battery systems and whatnot. Net metering doesn't require batteries. You still connect to the grid. Use the grid as kind of as your backup, right? So you produce power in the daytime and consume power from the grid at nighttime, presumably. But you might be offsetting equivalent to what you consume overall.
Yeah.
And so the break-even point that's expected for Ontario for solar is around 2016. And again, that will depend on your southern orientation, that will depend on your electricity consumption, and on trees and whatnot that might be shading your roof. But these ones are all through the feed-in tariff program. All the electricity that's produced on site would be consumed. Electrons go to the point of closest demand. But as you can see here, all the electricity goes out that bidirectional meter, and then wherever there's the closest point of consumption, those electrons will go there. So most likely, they would curve around and go back in one of the other meters and be used in these townhomes. So that's one of the beauties of solar or distributed power, is that it can be produced in an urban center where our consumption is.
Right.
Transmission losses on the grid are averaging around 10% across Ontario. So if we can reduce that, especially they peak at on those peak summer days, hot summer days, when the lines are actually sagging literally, and hot. So they lose a lot more in the transmission through just losses of heat. And so on those peak summer days when everyone's air conditioning comes on, that's when we need power production the most, and when we lose the most in our grid. So the more we can produce in the city, in the urban areas where we are using it, the power, the better off we are from an efficiency point of view. Which is why solar makes a lot of sense in a province like Ontario that has a peak demand in the summertime. Most other provinces have a peak in the wintertime, but because we're so far south and because we have such a high urban environment, we use a lot of cooling. So solar makes a lot of sense in Ontario. The other reason the solar policies or the feed-in tariff program included solar in Ontario was to inspire a manufacturing industry. So Ontario has become a producer of, there's about 27 facilities around the province now that at one point produced cars and are now producing either solar components or wind turbine components. And that was a big motivation behind the Green Energy Act in 2009. So here's again your meter, bidirectional meter with the other two consumption meters beside. Disconnect switch, same sort of setup as the other side. However, you'll see this large component here is replacing those inverters on the back of each panel. Here we have a central inverter, a string inverter, which is a Fronius 10 kilowatt inverter. And that's doing the DC to AC conversion before it goes into the grid. This also has a data logger. So both of the systems are visible. All the production data is available online, and you can link to it from our website. And we get more details than are available publicly, but we can see on a 10-minute basis what's being produced on any given system at any given point. Any questions on this?
So other than the shading reasons, is there an advantage to having a single inverter like this?
Cost. Yeah, cost and maintenance. I mean, this one's easier to access.
Yeah.
I didn't mention before, but the Enphase inverters are warranted for 20 years. And so they are expected to not have to be replaced, which is nice because they're behind each panel. But if there is something that goes wrong, they're a bit harder to get to.
Yeah.
Luckily for us, ours are kind of sticking out the back and we can get to them fairly easily. But if you imagine a whole slew of panels on a roof with those inverters tucked in behind, getting to the one in the middle is challenging, right? And so from a maintenance point of view, they're more difficult. That said, they're warranted for longer. This one's warranted for only 15 years, so we're expecting to have to replace this in year 15 or 12 or 15. This is the componentry that takes the most strain. in the solar system total.
It's like transformers.
Yeah, it's like that. It's a large version of that thing that plugs into your laptop that's taking AC power from the grid and making it into DC. This is doing the opposite.
And are you able to use this system because there's no risk of shading up here?
Yeah, so you'll see the back system here. There's no shading possibilities really. The other one, there's some trees in front. There's some parapets. It doesn't get much shade either, but for this one especially, there's very little shading. What you don't want to have, the reason that you would go with a central inverter is for cost and for maintenance. It's easy to get at this thing. If it goes down, we can quickly, with a step ladder, take a look at it or replace it. We can clean the fan, dust fan, fairly easily. And from a shading point of view, we don't have to worry about shade affecting our whole system. But if we did have, if one of these panels had a quarter of it shaded, it would bring down that whole string by an equivalent amount. Now this is getting into the reeds a bit, but there are different types of inverters like this that have multiple what's called maximum power point trackers, MPPT channels, and that helps lessen the effect of shading on the whole system. So the more MPPT trackers you have in an inverter, the better off you are from a shading point of view.
Do you have them?
But on this one, because there's very little shading, I believe there's maybe two, or if not even, or maybe just one. Do you know the?
Just one on those,
It's
yeah.
just one on an MPPT.
Yep.
So because we have no shading, we don't have to worry too much about it on this side.
What do you do about the snow in the winter?
On these systems, because they're sloped roofs, we don't get up there. We don't send people up on sloped roofs in the wintertime. These ones are nice because they're exposed to the wind pretty well, so the snow doesn't stay on them for too long. We have some other systems that are in kind of L-shaped buildings, and there the wind doesn't wipe the snow off quite as quickly. You could, depending on the height of your building, they have these things called snow rakes, and on some of our buildings we can access with a snow rake and pull the snow off.
Yeah.
And so that can be worthwhile in some cases, but where these are tenants, we try not to come and bother them too much.
Right. So does the production go significantly lower?
Oh yeah, if there's snow on the roof, there's nothing produced. If there's snow on the panels,
Do you generally get anything in winter here then, or with these?
Yeah, on a sunny day with no snow on the panels, we can definitely produce a pretty good amount for those short amount of hours, right? Yeah. July and August are our best production months for sure. Yeah. That said, on a sunny day in February, we can still produce quite a bit because electronics actually are more efficient the colder they are.
Oh, yeah.
It's like your computer, it slows down when it heats up.
Right.
So electronics are more efficient when they're colder, but there's shorter daylight hours in the winter, right? So we produce, although we might not reach our maximum possibilities in July and August, we still produce more overall because the days are longer and the sun is out more. May would be good too, but it's usually a little bit cloudier and a bit rainier.
So even though we have a ton of snow here, it still ends up being worthwhile to put in the solar.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're still calculating what we should be assuming for snow losses. There isn't a lot of data that is empirical data from Ottawa in particular about how much should you calculate into your assumptions for snow losses in the winter. We think it's probably higher than what we were told initially. Or the existing data, which a lot of it was from Toronto, and their snow climate is quite a bit different than ours. But again, it really depends on the type of snow. We found it's not just about your climate, it's also about the quality of snow, right? If you get sort of sticky snow and then it goes to -30, it just stays. It stays, it's stuck, right?
Right.
Unless you get out there when it's still wet and slide it off, it's just stuck there for weeks.
And like leaving your car at the airport.
Yeah, I'm sure you can imagine. And so that was what this winter was all about, was that sticky stuff that then was like -25 and stayed there for weeks. So it's more about the quality of snow. So this is the significant overbuild one. It's producing about 17% more than the other system. And so from a financial point of view, that makes sense for us because we got these panels. They're 225 watt panels versus the 250s on the other building. These were on sale. They were trying to get rid of them because they were a lower wattage panel. Canadian Solar also manufactured these panels. So the panel cost was relatively lower, and we had the space on the roof. So we decided to do an overbuild on this site to see what would happen. The current regulations under the feed-in tariff program don't allow overbuilds of that amount anymore. They cap it at 20%. And for small installations, if you're thinking about one on your own home, you actually can't overbuild at all. You have to go with just 10 kilowatts AC and DC as maximum. And so that was a unique feature of the Fit One program that we've decided to do a bit of research and see what happens. And it seems to be working out so far for us.
What was that you just said about putting panels on your own home for your own use? You're capped at 10 kilowatts.
If you go through the micro feed-in tariff program now, which is what you'd be looking at for your own home, you're no longer allowed to overbuild.
But what if you're living off grid and you're not?
Oh, then you can do whatever you want.
Oh, okay.
No one cares what you're doing if you're off grid, or if you're net metering, they also can't restrict you on how you build it.
Okay.
It's just if you're applying for the feed-in tariff program, which is a guaranteed rate per kilowatt hour that you produce. Right. These systems are all owned by the 300 members of OREC, owned and installed and financed. And we currently have 7 systems operating, 6 under construction. For those 6 that are under construction, we are inviting residents of Ottawa to invest in, become members of OREC and invest in those projects and earn a return from the installations on those 6 new buildings, 3 of which are on high schools, 3 of which are on barns or warehouses.